One drone costs $30,000. The missile that kills it costs $2 million. That ratio is not an accident, it is a strategy. Since 2019, Iran has launched thousands of Shahed drones into contested airspace. Some were shot down. Each intercept cost the defending side 60 times more than the attackers spent to force it. The United States Navy has been burning through missile stockpiles built over decades. Replenishment takes years. The math doesn't recover quickly. But the more important question isn't the cost, it's the source. Western intelligence spent years looking for the factory, the assembly line, the facility large enough to produce drones at this volume.
It was designed to disappear into plain sight. This is how Iran industrialized drone warfare without building a single industrial facility.
They were looking for the wrong thing. There is no factory. There are hundreds of garages. The production line doesn't appear on satellite imagery because it was never designed to. It was designed to disappear into plain sight. This is how Iran industrialized drone warfare without building a single industrial facility. Every factory has an address. That's the problem. In 1981, Israeli F-16 destroyed Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor in a single strike. One coordinate, one mission, one facility that took years to build, gone in 90 seconds. The lesson was absorbed across every military program in the region that wanted to survive long enough to matter. You cannot protect what can be found, and anything large enough to matter can be found. The KH-11 reconnaissance satellite resolves objects 15 centimeters across from 400 kilometers above the Earth. A factory floor visible from space is not a manufacturing asset. It is a scheduled demolition waiting for a political decision. Iran understood this earlier than most. The country had watched its nuclear facilities get mapped, sanctioned, and in at least one case physically destroyed by sabotage before a single weapon was produced. Large, centralized, and visible was not a viable architecture for anything Iran needed to keep alive under pressure.
Make each node small enough to fit inside a building that looks like nothing. A light industrial unit.
The Shahed program made a different choice. Not one facility, not one address, not one point on a targeting map that, once struck, ends production entirely. The decision was distribution. Push the manufacturing down, fracture it across dozens of locations, then hundreds. Make each node small enough to fit inside a building that looks like nothing. A light industrial unit. A workshop behind a residential block. A space that, from above, is indistinguishable from 10,000 other spaces in the same city. No single location produces a complete drone. Each produces a piece.
A small piston engine, 50 horsepower, the kind of power plant that belongs in an agricultural sprayer.
The piece moves. It joins other pieces from other locations. The system assembles itself only at the end. To destroy this network, you don't need one strike. You need perfect intelligence on hundreds of separate facilities simultaneously before the inventory moves. That intelligence doesn't exist. The network was built knowing it never would. The engine is the hardest part. Everything else is sheet metal and software. But the engine has to work. The Shahed 136 runs on a modified MD550, a small piston engine, 50 horsepower. The kind of power plant that belongs in an ultralight aircraft or an agricultural sprayer, not a weapons system. That ambiguity is not incidental. It is the entire logistics strategy. A crate of MD550 components doesn't look like a weapons shipment. It looks like light aviation parts. The kind of cargo that moves through commercial freight channels daily, across dozens of jurisdictions.
It runs through the same freight networks that move consumer electronics, automotive parts, and industrial equipment.
Handled by logistics companies that ask no questions because the manifest gives them no reason to. Customs officials are looking for missiles, for warheads, for things that announce their purpose. A small engine announces nothing. The same principle applies down the component list. Gyroscopes sourced from civilian drone manufacturers, GPS modules pulled from commercial navigation systems, altimeters identical to those used in recreational aviation. Each component, examined individually, belongs to a category of civilian hardware that moves freely across borders, because the global economy requires it to. The supply chain doesn't run through military channels. It runs through the same freight networks that move consumer electronics, automotive parts, and industrial equipment. Hidden not by encryption or armed escort, but by volume, by the sheer noise of legitimate global trade that processes millions of shipments daily and cannot inspect them all. Iran didn't build a smuggling network. It built a procurement strategy that doesn't require one. The components arrive. They move inward through distribution chains that branch and rebranch. No single courier carries enough to matter. No single seizure interrupts production for more than days. The engine reaches the garage. The garage doesn't know where it came from. It only knows what to do with it next. The airframe looks primitive. That's the point. A Shahed 136 is delta-winged, flat-bottomed, and simple enough. Its basic geometry can be reproduced by anyone with sheet metal tools and 2 weeks of practice. There is no complex curvature, no precision aerodynamic surface requiring specialized machining.
A component that once demanded industrial infrastructure now demands electricity and filament.
The shape was designed to be manufacturable by people who are not aerospace engineers. In spaces that are not aerospace facilities, this is not a limitation. It is the core architectural decision of the entire program. 3D printers now produce structural components that previously required injection molded tooling. That tooling cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The tooling was the barrier. Once you needed a factory to make the mold, you needed a factory. Once the mold is a file on a hard drive and the printer fits in a room, the factory requirement dissolves. A component that once demanded industrial infrastructure now demands electricity and filament. The printers used are not military. They are the same machines sitting in engineering schools and small manufacturing businesses across the world. Purchased openly, moved without declaration. Installed in workshops that produce nothing suspicious until the day they produce something specific.
The garage doesn't look like a weapons facility because the people inside it aren't building a weapon.
Final assembly happens last and fast. The components arrive from separate sources. The engine from one chain, the guidance package from another, the airframe sections from a third. They meet in a space that has held them for days at most, long enough to assemble, not long enough to appear on any pattern of activity that intelligence analysis would flag. The workers don't need to understand the weapon. They need to understand their section of it.
The missile that intercepts it is not a rounding error. A Raytheon AM-120 AMRAAM costs approximately $1.2 million per unit.
One team fits the engine. Another calibrates the guidance. Another checks the control surfaces. Compartmentalized knowledge. Each team knows one step, nobody knows the whole. Primitive in appearance, sophisticated in architecture. The garage doesn't look like a weapons facility because the people inside it aren't building a weapon. They're completing a puzzle whose other pieces were assembled somewhere else. $30,000. That is the fully loaded cost of one Shahed 136. Engine, airframe, guidance package, assembly labor. Every component sourced, moved, and integrated into a functional weapon. $30,000 is not a weapons budget. It is a rounding error in a Pentagon procurement line item. The missile that intercepts it is not a rounding error. A Raytheon AIM-120. AMRAAM costs approximately $1.2 million per unit.
It becomes a billion-dollar vessel that can no longer defend itself or the convoy it was sent to protect.
A single Patriot interceptor runs between $3 and $4 million depending on variant. The Israeli Iron Dome fires a Tamir interceptor at $50,000 minimum per launch. That is the cheapest option available to any advanced military operating in contested airspace today. The ratio doesn't fluctuate much, somewhere between 40-1 and 130-1, depending on which interceptor gets used. Every drone that forces an intercept wins economically, regardless of whether it hits anything. This is the mechanism of exhaustion. Not destruction, not territorial gain. Pure arithmetic applied to stockpiles that took years to accumulate and cannot be replenished quickly. The United States Navy operates Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Red Sea. Each carries roughly 96 missile cells. Those cells hold a finite number of interceptors. When the cells empty, the ship doesn't become less expensive to operate. It becomes a billion-dollar vessel that can no longer defend itself or the convoy it was sent to protect. Reloading at sea is not possible for most interceptor classes. The ship returns to port. The port is thousands of kilometers away. The production line that makes the replacement missiles runs at a rate designed for peacetime inventory management, not sustained attrition warfare. Iran is not trying to sink the destroyer. It is trying to empty it. One swarm. One reload cycle burned. One ship temporarily mission-killed without a single hull breach. The math doesn't require victory. It only requires continuation. The network exists. It cannot be struck into silence with a single mission or a single night of coordinated attacks. That much is established. The harder question is what comes next. Iran did not invent distributed manufacturing. It industrialized it for warfare. Took a principle that exists in commercial supply chains, in franchise business models, in cellular organization theory.
That is not an Iranian problem. That is everyone's problem. And no interceptor missile solves it.
And applied it to the production of weapons at scale. The innovation was not technical, it was architectural. And architecture copies faster than technology. Russia studied the Shahed program before signing procurement agreements. It didn't just buy the drone, it bought the production philosophy, licensed manufacturing, domestic assembly nodes, the same fracturing of production across distributed sites that makes the Iranian network resistant to targeting. That logic now operates inside Russian territory, feeding a war in Europe that has consumed interceptor stockpiles at a rate NATO planners did not model for. Yemen's Houthi forces assemble variants with fewer components, lower precision, shorter range, cruder, still flyable, still forcing intercepts that cost 50 times what the drone cost to build. The barrier to entry dropped again. The threshold keeps falling. The printer gets cheaper. The engine gets smaller. The guidance package gets more accessible. What required state resources in 2019 requires less in 2025. What requires less in 2025 will require less still. At some point, the analysis stops being about Iran specifically. It becomes about the architecture itself. A method of industrial warfare that requires no large facility, no visible supply chain, no single point that, once struck, ends the threat. The pipeline through the Zagros needed $2 billion in a decade. The missile city needed mountains and years of excavation. This needed garages and commercial freight and a file on a hard drive. The cost of entry to this kind of war just became a number most non-state actors can reach. That is not an Iranian problem. That is everyone's problem. And no interceptor missile solves it.